Welcome back to the abandoned post. Have you ever heard a knock at your door in the dead of night, only to remember the person who used to knock is already dead? The night story will crawl under your skin and stay there. It's a chilling tale of a neighbor long gone, but not forgotten, and certainly not resting in peace. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and prepare to be unsettled. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? Drop your location in the comments below if you're not too afraid to admit you're listening alone in the dark. It was 3:17 a.m. when the quiet thud on my front door jolted me awake, my breath caught in my throat. I shot up from bed, my heart pounding like a drum in the stillness. Shivering, I listened. Dead silent hallway, my pulse thundered in my ears. As I stared at the closed door, my skin prickled. Someone was outside, but it couldn't be, could it? It wasn't just any knock. It was the timid, irregular tapping that I knew all too well, like timid knuckles tapping the wood, letting out half-breaths of sound. At first, I thought I was still dreaming. The sound echoed through the quiet apartment, like a secret urgency slicing the darkness. I knew who it was before I got up and checked. It was Mrs. Calhoun, the old lady next door, the one I'd laid in the ground just 6 days ago. My heart seized. She died last week. My gentle, sweet neighbor who spent afternoons smelling her roses and feeding stray cats. Only 5 days earlier, I had carried my grocery bags past her apartment and heard the paramedics talk in hushed tones about the peaceful passing of an elderly woman who lived alone. I remembered the warm bread I'd offered her when I started cooking a meal, or the days she'd watered my plants while I was away on business trips. Just last month, she'd complained she couldn't sleep without her radio playing all night, just as she did the night before she took her last breath. I muttered a small prayer as I crept to the door. The tap 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 came again. 3 short taps, then one long, like a Morse code of desperation. My teeth chattered, not just from the cold creeping under the door frame, but from dread and confusion. Once she was alive, and I'd had a friendly chat with her over tea just weeks ago. Now her body lay in a funeral home, coffin sealed, and yet here I was, hearing her knuckles on my front door. My breathing hitched. Slowly, cautiously, I put on a cardigan over my nightshirt and moved toward the hallway. The carpet was cold under my bare feet. Every step felt like trudging through molasses. I scanned down the hall. Nothing moved. The living room to my right was pitch black, but the soft glow of a city light slipped through the curtains. I tried to steady my racing heart, telling myself logical things. I was hallucinating. I was drunk. Mrs. Calhoun was alive and out of bed, strong as ever, knocking on the wrong door in the middle of the night. My hand hovered over the light switch by the doorway, ready to flick it on, but I hesitated. A quiet moan of desperation came through the old wood door. It sounded familiar. It sounded like her. A sense of dread settled in the pit of my stomach. I noticed a cold draft tickling the nape of my neck, and I realized I was sweating. The doorknob rattled slightly, as if someone was about to turn it, or had just turned it and found it locked. But the knob felt solid under my skin. It was locked from the inside, or it wasn't moving at all. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to breathe evenly. "It's just the wind," I whispered, willing the lie to be true. The building was old. The pipes sometimes rattled. Floorboards groaned. Of course it was just the wind or the pipes. Any logical explanation? I didn't move for what felt like hours, even though my watch still read only 3:18. On the other side of the door, the silence returned. My heart slowed slightly. I cursed myself for being so jumpy and terrified all by myself, pushing myself to face reality. I pressed my eye to the peephole and peered out into the dim hallway. The strip of landing light cast a faint halo on the walls, but there was no one in sight, nothing out of place, no Mrs. Calhoun. I took a shaky breath and walked out of the bedroom, tugged on a heavier sweater, and retrieved the old pepper spray from my jacket pocket. My mother had given it to me last year after I complained about feeling unsafe walking home alone. I never expected to use it on an old lady, especially not one who was dead. I swallowed my fear and stepped slowly toward the door. Every step felt heavy, as if the floor itself wanted me to stop. The doorknob was locked. Shaking, I slid my key into the lock and turned it with as little sound as I could manage. When the lock clicked open, I glanced up the dark hallway leading to the stairwell, completely empty. I opened my door just a crack, splitting the inky darkness with the dull hallway light, and peered out again. The corridor was empty. Everything looked normal. The faint carpet stain at the end, where nobody had bothered to clean it. The elevator door, the old panel of light indicators, none of it moved or changed. I stepped out, pepper spray in one hand, other hand brushing against the cool walls. I felt like Alice wandering through a silent, twisted version of Wonderland. Something was very wrong. No neighbors were in sight. The corridor was still, as if time had paused. I leaned against my own doorframe for a moment, catching my breath before taking cautious steps toward the stairwell. 319. On my phone's small display, I started to walk, half expecting the sound of footsteps behind me. As I descended the stairs, the silence grew oppressive. It was a long walk down, but I didn't dare rush and risk bumping into something frightening. Half a block away from my apartment, the small old building entrance finally opened up to the outside. The cold night air hit me when I stepped outside. My breath formed a cloud in front of me. A car passed by, but aside from the muffled engine and the distant city hum, the alley behind my building was silent. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter. Street lamps cast a sickly orange light on cracked concrete. Any rational mind would ask, why am I here? There's nothing here. But I still felt compelled to walk around the building, to check something. Across the street was Mrs. Calhoun's place, a very similar building with a cream brick facade. I had often seen the lights on in her apartment at this hour. She liked quiet songs on the radio before bed. The glow from her living room spilled onto the cracked sidewalk. It looked dark now, no lamplight in her window. If anyone was in there, they had drapes pulled tight. I stepped closer anyway, as if drawn by some unseen force. I raised my hand and rapped lightly on her front door. Mrs. C, it's me, Mark, your neighbor. My voice cracked. I felt an idiotic relief. For a moment there was no one at home, or maybe something else was there, waiting. Either way, nobody answered. Nervously, I turned the doorknob and was shocked at how easily it gave way. The door swung open, revealing total darkness. Empty hallway. I flicked on the light. The bulb cast a sickly glow in the narrow corridor. The door had definitely been locked last time I saw it. There was no one inside, but the stale smell of old wallpaper and dust lingered in the air like a tomb. My eyes adjusted, looking for any signs of life, but I saw nothing except stiff lace curtains drawn across the living room window. I slipped inside without knocking again, my mind reeling at the force of compulsion that led me here. Hello, Mrs. Calhoun? No answer. My voice sounded muffled in the hollow apartment. By the entrance, the living room to the right had stacks of boxes I'd never noticed before. Perhaps she hadn't seen me in a month or more. Everything here felt foreign. I stepped forward, looking around carefully. In the living room, a record player sat on a small wooden table, its arm resting on an empty vinyl sleeve. The radio that she always fell asleep to was still on low, but the tuner was between stations, just static. The silence was deafening. I tried to rationalize. Probably she locked up tight, I said to myself, trying to recall any spare key protocol. But the previous silence from the hallway echoed louder, her radio playing her favorite old-time songs, and now static. The thought chilled me. My hands shook as I made my way deeper into the apartment. All was orderly, floral curtains, mismatched, crocheted throw pillows on a faded couch, dozens of picture frames on the mantel, all empty or family gatherings, decades old. A small silver cat figurine perched on the shelf. Everything felt frozen, untouched. I expected cobwebs, dust on everything, but the place looked somewhat lived in. There was a mug with cold tea on the coffee table. Chairs were still at the little kitchen table, as if she'd just gotten up. I walked toward the kitchen, where I found groceries in the fridge that I could have sworn I recognized from my shopping trip 2 days ago. Could it be, maybe she was still alive somewhere, and we had the wrong information? I slammed the refrigerator door, frustration and confusion roiling in me. If she was actually alive, that was something the doctors and police could have told us. My emotions tangled up, relief at the thought she might not really be dead, then terror at the implication that I might be losing my mind. Another knock, this time from behind me, just one solid tap, almost scaring me, half out of my wits. I spun around, my pepper spray held out in a shaky fist. Nobody was there. The apartment behind me was completely empty and silent. Slowly, rationality returned. This is insane, I said to myself. I stepped out onto the small landing. Next thing I knew, I was on a mission to find any clue, any proof she was alive. My heartbeat slapped in my ears, adrenaline surging. I turned the lock and pushed the door wide open and stepped back into the night. The street was empty, no cars besides the one that roared off a minute earlier. I felt far from home. Everyone seemed asleep. Should I call the police to break a door? But why? The door was open already. Everything felt upside down. I decided to head back up to my apartment. I needed to calm down, figure out what had actually happened. The air around me felt heavier with each step away from Mrs. Calhoun's door. When I finally slid back inside my apartment, a strong fragrance hit me, something like lavender and powder. Only then did I realize the power in the wind that had not been there earlier. The door locked behind me with a click. The house seemed to breathe in relief or fear, I couldn't tell. On the narrow TV stand in the living room, the screen was blaring static. It had been off when I left. Did I leave it on? I shook my head, confused. Was I being paranoid? Exhaustion overcame me, and my legs gave out on the carpeted stairs. I slid down and sat at the bottom of my stairs, chest heaving. Night crept on. Sleep was impossible. I lay in bed and turned on the lamp. Shadows danced on the walls like they had a life of their own. Every sound, from the hum of the fridge to the distant barking dog, felt amplified. Around 4:30 a.m., I heard that familiar tapping sound again, this time from my own bedroom window. 3 slow knocks on glass. I bolted upright so fast, I nearly yanked the cord out of the lamp. I shot off the bed and dashed to the window. The moonlight glinted on the empty sidewalk below, but the street was deserted. I flicked on my porch light and squinted into the gloom. All I saw was the empty sidewalk and a rustling bush at the edge of the yard. Nothing obvious. My throat was dry as dust. Adrenaline clenched my muscles. Just when I exhaled in relief, I heard something behind me, a soft shuffle on the carpet, like footsteps, but there was no one. I whirled around. The hall was empty, except for one small detail. On my coffee table, my grandma's antique locket lay open. That was impossible. I always kept it in my nightstand drawer, on its velvet cushion. I could have sworn I'd put it earlier tonight. Now it was here, flung open on the table, inside facing me. The panic in my chest ignited like wildfire. My eyes burned with exhaustion, but I had not slept a wink. The doorknob rattled again. Once, a soft, urgent bump. It continued. Someone was knocking again. At the door I had locked behind me, but I was already here, alone. Was I going crazy? I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself of sanity. It's a joke, I said aloud to the empty room, voice wavering. My imagination, or the neighbor's cat, could have triggered a leaf in the door, maybe a stray cat pawing at the door, but no animal knew how to open a deadbolt. I questioned myself, am I really awake, or is this another nightmare? I forced myself to walk to the door, each step reluctant. My pepper spray was still in hand, ready. I reached the knob and paused, gripped by doubt, but I needed to see something, anything. I finally turned the key and cracked the door open. Cold night air rushed in again, and my front porch light was just as empty as before. There was no figure, no sign of life at my feet, just an empty concrete step. The knock had come from outside, not from inside. But how? I was inside this whole time. I stepped off the porch and looked both ways down the street. A black SUV was parked at the corner, 100 yards away. Its silhouette under the street light was too dark to see well. The SUV's engine was off. It looked like nobody was in it. My pulse attacked me again, wild with fear. Was someone out there? I started down the street, voice steady. Hey, who's out here? I called, trying to sound bold. My voice trembled. The night answered only with crickets. Then suddenly, from the darkened SUV, the driver's side window slowly rolled down a few inches. With a quiet whir, I froze. A pair of eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. Human eyes, watching me. I saw no face, just those twin points reflecting the streetlight. It felt like a trap, too coincidental. Someone in the SUV, moving their window only after I shouted. The last thing I needed tonight was some sick prank, or worse. I took a step back. The SUV door creaked open. Hey, I shouted again. Come on, just show yourself. But no living person stepped out. The back of the SUV remained still, an empty space of darkness. My stance was defensive. The figure in the driver's seat did not move further. The handles jingled softly. This is messed up. I swallowed hard, adrenaline and exhaustion surging. What do you want? There was no answer, just silence. The moonlight swung around the house as some cars drove by, glinting off the black SUV. Then one last creak. The door closed and the engine stayed off. The SUV remained still, but now I realized the engine had been on. A faint whiff of exhaust had filled the air earlier. Then, as quickly as it had opened, the front door of my building behind me opened. A neighbor, Andrew from 2 floors above, stepped out in a bathrobe. Chio. Something going on. He squinted at me under his porch light. It's like 4 a.m. I realized how wild I must look. Paws sweating, hands shaking. I think someone's out there, I stammered, pointing at the SUV, which now sat fully dark and quiet. I realized the engine was silent. The SUV now looked empty and colder than before. Andrew followed my eyes. That was all it took. Our eyes fixed on it. Then, suddenly, a sound. The car door opened again, almost mechanically, with a scraping, quiet sound. The back door opened slowly, revealing no one. We looked on. Heart rate spiked, not moving. My hand gripped Andrew's arm. Then a shifting behind the back seats. Something shifting. A lady's shoe, faintly visible in the gloom. Then an arm with wrinkled skin, reaching out. It jerked my head away and covered my mouth. A cry caught in my throat. A wet cough. Once, twice. Something was breathing from the rear of the car. T was staring at it in horror, stuck as if glue held our feet. It was her. A fraction of a body turned into view. One ancient hand clung to the edge of the SUV seat. The hair, thick and white like cotton, spilled onto the seat and spilled out onto the road. A face, some of it. It was pale, translucent gray, eyes wide and staring but blank. The mouth was open, but no sound came. The chest rose and fell rapidly in non-life. Then the door slammed shut on its own, jolting us both back. The door slammed with a solid bang, and a heavy lock clicked. The SUV's engine roared to life, lights flaring a pale light around us. The car raced down the block, spinning tires in the gravel, and then vanished around the corner. I don't know what happened after. It was pure, stinging adrenaline. I tried to pursue, but the car's tail lights disappeared into the distance. I only remember grabbing Andrew. "Did you see that?" I shook him. He was pale, trembling, nodding, tears in his eyes. "I need you to promise. Don't tell anyone I'm weird, okay? But you saw that, right? Something's not right with Mrs. Calhoun." We stood on the street for a long moment, breath heavy. The quiet returned, with the adrenaline making silence deafening. I looked down. My dress shoes felt heavy in the gravel. My hands clawed at the cuffs of my pajamas. The cold night air felt like needles on my lungs. "Come on," Andrew said quietly. He took my arm firmly, guiding me up the street. We looked back. The SUV was long gone. I led Andrew up the stairs to my apartment in silence. We were both wide-eyed, shaken. Inside, I locked all the doors. I would never sleep again. We sat on my threadbare couch, under dim light, staring at the opposite wall as dawn crept in, and the sky turned a pale gray. I realized with a sinking feeling I had not slept at all last night, but the clock said it was now morning. The sun came up, and people emerged onto the street. I told myself I should call the police, but I didn't. How could I? I had no proof. It would sound insane, telling them about Knox, and an empty SUV, and a corpse lady would guarantee a psych ward. I needed answers, and no one was going to give them to me. The old lady might have been dead, but she was coming for me. The neighborhood slowly awakened around me. I called in sick to work, citing a migraine. I suddenly felt creeping behind my eyes. Everyone would just think I'm tired. Who would know the real reason? I spent the day distractedly flipping through the phone book and looking online about ghostly phenomena and door knocks. There were forums where people claimed to have heard knocks from departed loved ones, seeking help. It always ended badly. People usually ended up locked up, or worse. By the time the second night came, I had paced my apartment like a caged animal. Anxiety had gnawed at me all day. I felt bugs crawling under my skin and jittered every time there was a loud noise outside. I rummaged all evening for anything I could use to defend myself, but mostly just about everything I found either was locked up or dangerous to handle. My pepper spray was in my jacket pocket. I had a kitchen knife hidden nearby, a ritual of mental readiness. Night fell heavy and silent. I made myself a small meal, trembling so badly, I spilled half the soup on my shirt. I tried to eat, telling myself I needed energy to face whatever came. The clock crawled toward midnight. I stepped out on my balcony and looked into the street, one eye on the darkness. They say city nights are never truly dark, but when you're scared, even the light seems to cast lurking shadows. The street below was quiet at that hour. A street light flickered on the corner. Occasionally, a car droned by. I could hear the distant hum of highway traffic, the muffled people chatting on the other side of buildings. All normal, but my instinct screamed at me to watch everything. It was 1:03 when I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock on my window. The screen couldn't have been moved. The window was shut, and yet the taps came from outside. Just the same soft, hesitant sound as Mrs. Calhoun had used. I choked out a small sob, leaning over the railing. I gazed down, but again saw nothing on the ground or on the fire escape. I slid into the house, unlatched the window cautiously, and closed it tight. I saw the window was locked already, but I double-locked it anyway. Every muscle in my body protested just breathing. Did that truly happen? Was I going mad? The hands around my chest felt real. I could almost feel her, though invisible. I could smell that lavender scent again, strong in the room. Looking through the peephole again was futile at this distance. My eyes trailed the street for suspicious cars, but saw nothing out of place. Nothing except one thing. Directly across the street, from the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement. A shadow passing by the living room window of Mrs. Calhoun's apartment. Her curtains should have been tightly drawn. They weren't. I squinted into the darkness, blinking away sleep deprivation. The window looked draped. I shook my head. Perhaps it had been my reflection. The street lamp. Something benign. But now from my door came another gentle knock, sure and slow. I nearly dropped my glass of water. The doorknob rattled again, patted by quiet knuckles. I tightened my mouth. This wasn't a dream. The old lady's voice whispered at the back of my mind. Why aren't you answering me, dear? That wasn't real, but it was. It had to have been. I heard the door jostle. My knees buckled and I slid down the wall, kicking the pepper spray beyond my reach without realizing. I stared at the door, desperately fighting the urge to burst into tears. The knocking persisted, gentle but urgent. Finally, I managed to whisper, "What do you want?" But of course there was no reply, just silence behind the door, a silence that stretched and stretched, pressing into me like water. It was going on for maybe 5 minutes that felt like hours, just me in the dark, waiting. Then something changed. The knocking stopped, and I heard a steady, soft shuffle on the other side of the door. Someone, walking slowly away down the hallway, one step at a time, then silence. I scrambled up and unlocked the door, throwing it open in one burst. Nothing, not even a breath of wind. The hallway was still. The lights in the building to the left flickered and whirled. The street outside completely quiet, but across the street, the curtains in the window I had watched flipped shut in a hurry. I'd feel something move behind me on the sofa if I turned around in a second. My spine melted into the couch, paralyzed with disbelief. I hadn't called for any of this to happen. I hadn't invited it, and yet something had come. The rest of that night, I didn't sleep. I sat staring at the blank screen of my television. Once I foolishly believed the TV was the culprit, perhaps playing spooky static on its own. But now I knew better. The night passed slowly and brutally. Every creak and drip and distant siren set my nerves on edge. My dream had turned into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The days after that blurred together. I went to work in zombie mode, exhausted and jittery. My colleagues noticed my ashen face and wild eyes, but I lied, said I was having migraines and insomnia. They left it at that. I couldn't tell anyone the truth. Who would believe? And I couldn't sleep. Every night I lay in the bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of unasked questions and what-ifs. Each night the knocks came, around 1 or 2 in the morning. They never came earlier. I knew now that they would come. I'd lie there, wide awake, as the tap 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 sounded on my front door, sometimes on my window, rarely on the wall or closet door. Only taps, never any voice or anything recognizable, but always that heartbreak beat pattern. It was her. I was sure of it. The old lady was knocking. I'd call out, softly, "I'm here. I'm not giving you any trouble." But she never answered. I guess If she could answer, she would have. The wood still thudded on the hallway door. I felt guilty too. What had I done? Why was she here? I found myself talking to the door. Leave me alone, I begged at once, tears wet on my cheeks. But the door stayed shut. The knocking resumed as soon as I stopped pleading. It sounded so human. The knock, not like branches or rats, but alive. One morning, groggy and shaking, I found a note slipped through my letterbox. Just a scrap of a flower print stationery, and the scrawled handwriting was shaky, as if frightened. Help me, please. I felt my knees shake so hard I almost fell. I grabbed the note and clutched it in trembling hands. Who? I knew. Not just her writing style. It almost looked like mine, but not. I had never used such stationery. I looked around, heart thundering. The house was empty, just me and that note. Was she communicating through my door? Not happening in my apartment. I stuffed it in my pocket, heart hammering. Without thinking, I hopped into my car and drove next door, across the narrow alleyway, directly to her apartment. To my rational mind tried to catch up. She's dead. Old lady. She needs help. How? I didn't knock this time. I ran through her unlocked door, without bothering. The place was again empty, silent as a mausoleum. But I knew where she was. Her bedroom door, down the hall. My hand was pressing on her door handle. It opened with a groan. I flicked the light on, and nothing. The bed was empty, neatly made, as if no one had slept in it. That note terrified me. Her room looked exactly as she left it. There was a chair by the window, and on it a half-open book of poetry on aging. On the dresser, a dusty but familiar perfume bottle of lavender. Where was the old lady? I ran to her closet. The door was closed, clothes hanging inside. The funny feeling crept over me. I flung the door open, hoping to find her behind it. Nothing but clothes, hangers, and 2 stacked hat boxes. The bottom one was locked. The top one contained an old fur hat she loved. But the bottom, it had a tiny keyhole. Or was it a latch? I turned away, noticing on the door that faintly a message had been scratched in. Or maybe it had just appeared there. Don't leave or something. The words were wrong. I could see the letters trembling. The writing was sloppy, like someone who couldn't hold a pen well. Possibly written by her if she only had one hand, or left as a message from beyond. I remember backing up, stumbling out of her room. That's when I noticed it. The faintest trail of blood on her floor, old and crusted in tiny patches, leading from the bedroom. A glint on the floor, near the end of it. I clicked my phone camera and zoomed in. The flash revealed a single silver key lying there. The key had an unfamiliar shape, not like any door key. It must have fit something in the house, likely one of those hat boxes or drawer lock. Hello, I called out softly. That's when I heard it again. A cough, dry, weak, coming from somewhere just behind me. Not exactly behind, but nearby. I couldn't pinpoint it. Another cough, tinny. I turned slowly. The air got colder, like a blast from an icy night wind. There, through the bedroom wall behind me, a silhouette of a woman, drifting in front of the frosted window pane. The shape looked exactly like how I remembered Mrs. Calhoun's slender form. She wore a nightgown, old-fashioned. Her hair was knotted up, a few strands loose by her ear. She was transparent, glowing white, but I recognized her face, though it was twisted into a look of such sadness that my heart squeezed in my chest. She lifted an eyebrow, her lips moving, though no sound came. Her hand was lifting slowly, pointing at the closet door behind me. That letter scratched on it, as if asking me to turn around. My instincts hollered, but I was frozen. I turned my whole body, and just then she jerked her hand, pointed at the closed hat box under the closet, the one with the little latch. Slowly, impossibly, The latch flipped itself open with a quiet clink. I gasped and scrambled to it. The silver key was on the ground. My hands shook violently as I scooped it up, breathing raggedly. The ghost was watching me, without blinking, offering, urging me to do something. She looked more pleading than frightening. "Please," I whispered, though I didn't know if she could hear me. The silence was crushing. I lifted the box and slid the key into the small keyhole. It fit perfectly, turned smoothly. The lid slowly lifted with the tiniest click. Inside was a small journal, leather-bound and faded. It was Mrs. Calhoun's diary. I didn't know what I expected to find. Maybe some old letters, some memories. The front page had her distinctive handwriting, except strangely, some lines in another hand. I read the first entries. March 3rd. The mailman was late today. Mark still hasn't asked me to dinner. The nights are so empty without visitors. I made tea. She wrote like one my grandmother would. Careful grammar, gentle sighing tone. Each page was a day from her last year. But then it changed to something darker. June 21st. There's someone outside. I see them in the shadow every night. They keep knocking at midnight. I told myself it was just my ears playing tricks. But it's her. It's not Mark. It's her. He's here. I feel her touch on my door. My blood turned to ice. All this time, it wasn't just me. She was being visited before by the same phenomenon. I read faster, heart thrashing. She wrote that other nights, when she would wait to the knock, she would open the door, but nobody stood there. Just the eerie silence. A photo fell out from between the pages. It showed the old lady, clear-eyed, leaning on a walker outside our building, and next to her was a stooped man with his face hidden in shadow. The photo was labeled in her careful handwriting, "My friend John. He passed away last October." John, the neighbor across the hall. He died last fall. Never known as a good man. And apparently she had known him. Why was he hidden in the photo? It felt like a puzzle. Did that shadow man have anything to do with it? I began to wonder if maybe she had known death was coming. Or he did. The next entry. July 5th. I think he's coming for me. John. He appears at my door, and then disappears into the night. Everyone thinks I'm crazy. She wrote about not sleeping, being afraid, hearing her own name whispered sometimes. I flipped through more pages. She mentioned hearing about me, an outsider, maybe in one scribble. I told him I was lonely and needed company, but he said no, he only ever came for her. She scratched out some pages, or whitewashed them with old paint. She wrote again near the end. He keeps whispering, "Join us." I fear he means me. Mark is my only friend now, but even Mark cannot save me. Tonight I wrote a will. God, I am afraid. My whole arm raised the hair as I continued reading. The entries got sporadic, then stopped after an undecipherable note. Time's running out. The knocks are loud tonight. Your door is next. That was the last legible line. I slammed the diary shut, stomach churning. Something touched my shoulder, and I nearly shrieked. It was the ghost, pressing close behind me. She seemed to want me to see it all. I felt her sadness, her fear. Was it guilt, maybe, or was it longing? I couldn't tell. I closed my eyes and said, "I'm sorry then. I'll help you." Then she was gone from sight, but I felt a relief and terror both at once. All this time I had thought I was being haunted, but it seemed the haunting was an echo of her own final hours, the same force that had taken her. Did she get trapped here? Was I meant to find this out? It was as if her ghost wanted me to understand the story, maybe to do something. I took the diary and key and left her apartment as quietly as possible. Back home, I locked the door behind me, but I did not feel safe. That night, all I could think about was the journal. I had so many questions. Mark was mentioned. Mark, who is Mark? Perhaps the poet's photo. The diary mentioned names. Maybe Mark was a last friend, and John the man in the photo. The next day, I got dressed and knocked on a few neighbors' doors, not to tell them about ghosts, but to learn more discreetly. The first was an older woman, thin and gossiping. "Mrs. Johnson," I started. "Do you know the old man from 1B John? He died months ago, right? And Mrs. Calhoun, didn't she know him?" I smiled politely, masking urgency. She leaned in as if afraid others would overhear. "Yes, dear. I heard they were close. Very quiet about it though. Seemed something shady. Some say he looked sickly. Was found downstairs one morning. Just collapsed. They suspected he was, maybe poisoned. But who knows?" She whispered the last word, glancing around. "They didn't do an autopsy. He was old, but some people said they heard arguments late at night. Others said he had some things in that apartment. Books with strange symbols, stuff, not normal reading, if you ask me." My hair stood on end. "Strange symbols? What, like occult stuff?" She nodded. "He was big into old folklore, they say. Crazy stories about spirits. She was into church, sweet old lady. But old men have secrets, I guess. After he died, they say she started acting odd, locking herself up, praying more, that sort of thing." She shuddered, then scurried away, muttering that she had chores. This was not the normal old lady's life story. The notion of folklore, spirits, maybe poisoning, set my brain whirring. The mention of arguments between her and a sickly man. Could he have killed her, or she him? Or were they both afraid of something? I needed to know more about John. I headed to the local library, and there I found the neighborhood newspaper archives. Under police briefs, it said, "Man named John A. Hughes, 78, resident of 1B, died of heart failure in his apartment. Initial reports suggest no foul play, no mention of anything unusual." But another column had his obituary. "Beloved husband and neighbor John A. Hughes, active in historical society. Wife predeceased him by 10 years, survived by niece. Historical society." Could that have been a cover for something less innocent? I felt my skin prickle. Something between John and Mrs. Calhoun. The name Mark still nagged. As I read, I noticed the byline had a staff name, T. Morris. Not relevant, but it struck me. I stepped out into the street, filled with restless air. I would need answers from whoever T. Morris was. The reporter, or find Mark, or the niece of John, or maybe just pray I'm wrong. By sunset, I had decided to do something neither the living nor dead expected. I set a trap. I would spend this night in my apartment's living room, with no window open, and no TV or radio. If the knocking came again on the door, I would answer in my own way. If the ghost was looking for help, maybe I could end this nightmare. I laid out my pepper spray on the coffee table, keeping it close. I wrote down what I knew on a notepad. Meanwhile, I listened to the neighborhood, the hum of older air conditioners, the faraway sirens, the night cicadas. My heart beat a frantic tattoo. I felt watched, even though I saw no eyes. And then at exactly midnight, as predicted, it came. 3 gentle taps on my door. I jumped and took the notepad and pepper spray up with me. The knock stayed for a while, even with the door unlocked. I felt almost dizzy with exhaustion. Then I tried a different tactic. I whispered to the door, "Mrs. Calhoun, it's me, Mark. I know you're there. Please, I'm sorry. I'll help. Just don't hurt me." That was an absurd thing to say, but it might calm whatever it was. Silence greeted me, then the silent shuffle of footsteps again, receding into the distance. The taps stopped. The house felt empty. A cold gust of air blew through the corridor. My resolve evaporated. I bolted up the stairs, adrenaline still surging. By the time I reached the ground floor, I nearly tripped from panic. You know how when something shocks you, your whole body can't function properly. I was twitchy and shaky, nearly forgetting to breathe. In the stairwell, the wind from outside knocked over a small picture I'd had pinned to the wall above the light switch. The photo frame shattered on the tile floor. It was a photo of me and Mrs. Calhoun at a summer picnic months ago. Sunlit smiles. It was shards of our faces on the floor now. One piece had me smiling and her looking over my shoulder. I swore I saw her wink at me from that broken corner. With trembling hands, I scooped up the shards. The last time I will ever see that face. My face, gone, mine. Everything pointed to one truth. Mrs. Calhoun was indeed dead, but something had tied to me after her. This finality settled with unexpected calm. I knelt on the cold floor, watching fragments of glass under the staircase light. I promised her under my breath, "I'll fix this." It was then I noticed an envelope under the bottom stair. Maybe it fell out from the mantel of my own apartment. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was another note. "You have her diary. You have the key. You know too much now. Free her or die." There was no name, no handwriting clue, just a sense that someone knew what I did. I felt blood drain from my face. So it wasn't just me and her ghost. Someone living knew, was watching. I barely made it home alive that night, adrenaline still rippling through me. The next morning, I called in sick again. I knew now what I had to do. I had to find where that key fit. She had been trapped by something, and I needed to break it. The key had one obvious target. The hatbox's latch was already unlocked. The other obvious target was in my place. Or maybe it fit someone else's lock. Maybe John's old apartment, but he was gone. The key wouldn't fit that, or the lock on the bottom of that hatbox. But it had a key I used. I went through the tiny boxes and drawers of Mrs. Calhoun's house. In a dusty corner of the kitchen cupboard, I found a ceramic jar with a single keyhole on it. It was labeled, "Lizzie's Treasures." A tattered piece of paper behind it said, "Keeps her secret safe." Lizzie was what we called her when we were kids. Long before I was her friend. My heart stuttered. The jar was locked, but in the dust I found another keyhole, shaped exactly like the key in the diary. It fit. I twisted it, and the lid popped open. Inside was a folded white ribbon, some spare change, and a sealed envelope addressed to me, in Mrs. Calhoun's spidery handwriting. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside, neat and small. "If you are reading this, I am probably gone. John and I were involved with something many years ago, something I never told the police about. The things we summoned, they never forget. The knocking is not him, but his doing, and hers. Mark, please, promise me. If you find this, burn everything we made. The book, the pictures, the songs. Destroy what's left. Do not be afraid. You are safe if you keep moving." That was signed Agnes, her real name, my own name. I sank to the floor of her kitchen, the letter fluttering in my hands. So John and Mrs. Calhoun had an occult past. They were messing with something that decided to kill them. Perhaps when she died, her time came, but he came early, and maybe that angered things. It seemed he wasn't welcome yet. Now it was after midnight knocks, driving him insane. This all tied to me, because maybe she had asked for help. I could feel her presence again in the room, but not angry, sad. Yes, but relieved that her story was told. The knockings had stopped. After I read that, good, the calm in me returned as I closed my eyes. That very night, the dream began. I saw her with John, two heads bent over a circle of candles, an incantation. They had gotten in deeper than I thought. Something came through that circle, not human, monstrous. They bound it, making a pact. But one side always loses in deals with devils. She had slipped away, now it wanted her back. Through me, the morning's dawn was tinged with sunlight. When the final confrontation came, she knocked at my door. At midnight, as usual, I answered immediately. Flinging open the door, the hallway was filled with a stench. Stale leather, wet earth, burnt sugar. A form stood there. I have never been so terrified or fascinated in my life. It was a woman shaped of shadow and mist, like smoke twisted into a body. But at her center was the unmistakable calm face of Mrs. Calhoun, or what she had become. Her eyes were hollow pits of black, where stars twinkled instead of pupils. She tilted her head and smiled, showing black stained teeth. Where she stepped, roses of ice bloomed at her feet. "Mark," she said in a voice that echoed like ripples on a still pond. It was indeed her voice, but if she had been turned to a record playing slow, the voice was both hers and not hers. Inside, something ancient whispered in language I couldn't understand. A chill of knowing scraped along my skin. There was no malice in her, just a deep sadness. "He's taken much," she said softly, as if reciting. "It's your turn." I lifted my pepper spray instinctively, but she held up a pale, transparent hand. "Please," she begged, so soft, I realized I could speak. "Mrs. Calhoun, I'm sorry for everything. You are free," I blurted out. "Free?" she asked, and her form flickered with hope. Then she pointed behind me, into the dark corridor, her ghostly finger nearly translucent. I followed it, seeing the air swirl. Through the vortex, I saw John's spectral figure being dragged away screaming, disappearing as it neared her once lovely window. The air hissed, the swirl closed. I gasped. "I did it," I asked, half disbelieving. "I set her free." She gave a small, peaceful smile, the first real one I'd ever seen. Then the ghostly figure started to fade, like fog under the morning sun. Before she vanished entirely, she whispered in my ear, a secret no one else would ever hear. "Goodbye, friend." She was gone. The hallway lit up with silence. I was alone, alive. I staggered inside, feeling light and heavy, all at once. In the days that followed, I found myself sleeping at night again. The nightmares mostly gone. The apartment returned to normal. No more knocks. I found in the trash a beaten old volume of folk tales that I recognized as John's Book of Rituals. I buried it under the floorboards, wrapped in fabric, wishing it out of my way. In the end, I sometimes still feel a presence walking past at midnight. A cold breeze moves through the apartment. The faintest whiff of Mrs. Calhoun's lavender lotion drifts by. I touch the locket around my neck, the one she had given me at the picnic, and I smile. In the darkness, I don't know where she is now, maybe at peace, or beyond. But sometimes, when I'm locking my door, I swear I can hear a gentle tap on the wood, soft and far away, like a quiet goodnight from an old friend. One last time, if you're still with me, thank you. Some knocks are just the wind, some are neighbors, and some should never be answered at all. What happened that night changed everything, and while I haven't heard the knock again, I still don't sleep much. Not since she came back, or whatever that thing was pretending to be her. If you enjoyed this terrifying tale, and want more real horror stories that make you question reality, give this video a like, and subscribe for more spine-chilling content. And remember, sometimes the dead don't stay dead. Sleep tight, if you still can.